Space Dad making a fool out of me!
Picture a guy who's so utterly invisible that even getting the most incredible superpowers in the world won't earn him any notice. Not from the girl he likes, not from anyone in an entire fictional universe, and not even from the audience watching the movie.
Who on earth is that?
That person is Hal, or Titan. Despite being the villain of DreamWorks' 2010 production Megamind, he's a tough character to recall. But it is the very inconspicuousness that makes him the perfect Wrathful villain. Hal is an average guy with a mediocre job, no social life, and zero hobbies. In fact, throughout the first half of Megamind, we barely pay any heed to him because the guy brings nothing to the table and assumes an unimpressive nonchalance towards life. In stark contrast to the rest of the characters on the show, who are all extremely passionate about whatever it is that they're doing, Hal simply doesn't seem to care. He does seem to, however, be obsessed about one thing: going on a date with Roxanne. And when he doesn't get that thing, Hal uses his wholly unearned and entirely unstoppable superpowers of incredible destruction to unleash fury like hell hath known upon his town. But could someone truly be this infuriated because a girl declined his invitation to a date? Hal's superpowers at one point in the film showcase him as the most powerful person in the world.
Titan has freed us! Oh, I wouldn't say free. More like under new management.
Beyond not getting the girl he wanted, what's the essence of Hal's fury, and how does it play into making him such a great Wrathful villain? Why wasn't Megamind someone who had also been alienated for the entirety of his life, equally as enraged by his circumstances? To get those answers, we have to go to Metro City, where everything takes place. Metro City is a vibrant urban area that has been laid siege to by a villain for decades, but it's not the guy we're discussing right now. No, Titan's spell of evil was brief. It was quite memorable though, but more on that later. Before, it was Megamind wreaking havoc and chaos. But this area seems to be a magnet for supernatural beings because the iconic hero, Metro Man, has also been raised here. Hal was originally a cameraman for the bright and attractive Roxanne Ritchie, a news reporter who thrives on giving the public updates about the battle between good and evil. This enduring fight is one of the central themes of Megamind and points toward the power of passion and choice. As Megamind repeatedly challenges Metro Man in an unending, cordial, and hilarious game of wits, Hal follows Roxanne around as she commentates on their spats and is often pulled in between them. Hal is clearly jealous of Metro Man, who he thinks is dating Roxanne, and tells her that he would never let her get kidnapped, except of course when he repeatedly does.
If I were Metro Man, Megamind wouldn't be kidnapping you all the time. That's the first thing.
Roxanne is routinely abducted by Megamind. Each time this happens, Metro Man comes to the rescue and saves her life. The schemes on part of Megamind in these rounds are typically quite elaborate, including jailbreaks, invisible cars, scientific inventions, and reptiles. But Metro Man's strengths and superpowers overcome them. But wait, if we already have a jailbreaking, reporter kidnapping, evil genius on the loose, what role does Titan play? Well, Titan is not only the villain of this movie, he's also a frenzied beast. And it didn't start when he became Titan. No, Hal was a bad guy long before he grew a six-pack and wore a cape. Getting his heart broken by a girl only activated everything that he had always been carrying within: shame, fear, and insecurity.
We're like an old married couple.
Look, there is no us, okay? There will never be an us.
So he transformed all of that into rage. How did the writers manage to showcase and then channel these characteristics into wrath? I want to break it down for you. See, the trick is to create a villain that's so hollow on the inside that they have no course of action left except to resort to rage and indignance. It all lies in his origin story. Hal became Titan by sheer dumb luck. In the first act of the film, Megamind is shown to be engaging in a year-on-year effort to defeat Metro Man. One day, somehow, he evidently succeeds. After Megamind thinks that he has nobody left to fight, he can find neither reason nor purpose to live and plummets into deep depression. But Megamind has feelings. He expressed his remorse at Metro Man's death to a giant statue of this golden hero. He even brings him flowers. It is at this juncture that he almost runs into Roxanne, who is disturbed by the rampant corruption within the city in the absence of a manifest hero. Megamind quickly takes on a disguise to prevent himself from being seen by Roxanne. She doesn't recognize him in his new form, and over the course of an exchange between these two, an idea is born. A new hero must be created in order to defeat crime. Passion reignites. Both Megamind as well as Roxanne discover newfound purpose. Megamind decides to apply his genius to create an arch-nemesis for himself, and Roxanne decides to find one. Megamind gathers DNA from Metro Man's white and gold cape to create a golden bullet that, when fired, would imbue its target with the same superpowers as the evidently deceased hero Metro Man. Roxanne, however, is a little too excited. She disappears right under Hal's nose into the secret entrance gateway to Megamind's hideout and stumbles upon the gun. Megamind tries seizing it from her, but she makes a run for it. In doing so, the trigger is accidentally set off, and the golden bullet zooms through a vent pipe, right into Hal's nose.
I think a bee flew up my nose.
Yeah, he's clueless. So clueless, in fact, that when Megamind and Minion show up at his place, he still has no idea what's going on. Despite warnings from Minion, Megamind firmly believes that Hal was destined to receive this gift. He decides to train him so that he can step into the shoes of Metro Man and restore the status quo in Metro City.
You've been blessed with unfathomable power.
What Hal received was a gift, but he's not prepared to see it that way. In true consistency with the film's dedication to the power of choice, Hal starts using his newfound powers for evil. From abusing his laser vision to spying on Roxanne, there's nothing wrong that Hal, or Titan as he is now known, won't do. The true switch doesn't even happen yet, though. It happens in the later half of the film, when Megamind bursts into Titan's apartment, furious at having been stood up in a duel. It is here that we find out for the first time that Titan has used his powers for evil, and it's not even a grand scheme of elaborate villainy that would at least inspire some awe. Titan stole money from a bank. I mean, imagine having super speed, super strength, and eagle eyes that cast laser beams. One would think that he'd put them to use. Petty theft? At least be original, man. Megamind has been out here building robots that swarm the city. He's built a satellite that concentrates the heat of the sun. But with your singular brain cell, I'm sure that's all you could manage. Oh yeah, that's how he spells his superhero name. And the reason this guy refused to show up to his duel against Megamind was that he didn't see the point of being a force of good when being good didn't get him the girl. I mean, I'd say Roxanne dodged a bullet with this one.
Being a hero is for losers. I only took the gig to get the girl, and it turns out Roxanne doesn't want anything to do with me.
Final moment of conversion, the point where Titan becomes irreversibly destructive, is when Megamind prods him into battle and provokes him by letting him know that it is he, in fact, who is dating Roxanne. Titan became a villain because he was scorned. No, wait, my mistake. He was already a thief at this point and wanted to join forces with Megamind. Titan threw a fit that could wipe out a whole city simply because he was scorned. Like I said though, this guy was always a bad egg, and hints of this destructive inclination were subtly given throughout the film. The guy definitely always had anger issues. One example is time he stubbed his toe by ramming it into the van because he was frustrated at himself for not knowing what Roxanne would like. Or perhaps it was a mixture of frustration and disappointment at the fact that she declined to hang out with him. All of this does, however, go back to the beginning, where if we look closely, we can begin to see it right from the very first time he appears. The first dialogue that Hal ever says in the film showcases a passive-aggressive side.
Wow, okay, the stuff they make you read on air, that's unfreaking believable. It's crazy.
He immediately backtracks on it too. This is an incredible introduction of the character because not only does it tell us that he is somewhat irritable and quite condescending, we also learn within the next second that Hal doesn't have a spine. Later on in the movie, Minion digs up Hal's background. It's been pretty obvious to us from the very beginning that Minion's analysis of making Hal a superhero is on point. The fish is right, it's a terrible idea. Megamind, on the other hand, cannot possibly know. The reason Titan became such a great Wrathful villain is that we already knew that he would likely not use his superpowers wisely. He can't, of course. He wouldn't even know how to if he tried, so we actually somewhat expected him to blow things up. By accident though, not on purpose. Hal's inability to be noticed complemented his wrathful villainy with perfection. We did not see that one coming. In the entrance scene, it's also clear that Hal is into Roxanne. He's jealous of her relationship with Metro Man and can't tell his head from his foot. It's also pretty obvious that Roxanne isn't interested in him.
What are we, like, let's just get a coffee or something.
Come on, it's time to get in the Metro Man Day spirit.
I mean, buddy, take a hint. So, Roxanne's rejection of Hal was something that he should have seen for a long time coming. This isn't the only time she turns him down either, but we'll get to that part later. For now, we can see that Hal's aforementioned unimpressive nonchalance allows Megamind to once again kidnap Roxanne right from under his nose. Hal is too absorbed in his own monologue to notice that she's missing and only turns around and sees that she's gone when she doesn't give him a response. This should establish the fact that he doesn't actually like Roxanne. He likes the idea of dating Roxanne and convinces himself through a trip to Delulu Land that it's actually possible. Hal hasn't just deluded himself into thinking that he could be with Roxanne, he's also deluded himself into believing that he likes her. Why though? Here's what I think. Hal seems to be really into Roxanne throughout the movie. This is evident in the fact that she's the only person and entity, in fact, that he seems to be even mildly concerned about.
Well, look, partner, I'm her partner.
In Hal's first introduction as a character, he expresses disdain for something that Roxanne has written. It isn't playful banter, it's outright condescension, so it's clear that he doesn't really like her. He does think so, though, because he asks her out again. Let's take a look at the complete lack of empathy here. Hal isn't concerned about Roxanne because she's lost a good friend and must be upset about it. He rather sets up a childish party for her at his place, with him alone. And he doesn't think of her as Roxanne, the beautiful reporter who he works with.
Chicks don't like bounty houses, they like clowns! Ow! Oh.
Roxanne is just a chick to him, and he's actually quite condescending towards her.
She doesn't know what she's saying. She's been through a traumatic experience.
So now, why is he so desperately obsessed with her, and why can't he accept the fact that she doesn't like him? It's because he doesn't have a lot going for him. See, we already know that Hal is a weak person. He's gutless, unassertive, apathetic, and generally scattered all over the place. From a psychological standpoint, someone who leads that kind of a life and is unwilling to take any action to improve themselves will likely always fill the void that they feel in their lives with obsessive fantasies that typically involve another person. These fantasies serve to elevate their social status and make their life more passionate than it currently is. Hal's infatuation with Roxanne stems not from a place of genuine regard, but rather a mental quick fix that would radically alter his life. He basically thinks that he'd get to be like Metro Man if he had Roxanne by his side. It's an offshoot of a delusion of grandeur, and again, immensely lazy. So Hal's true motivation is not to get to be with Roxanne, but rather to be perceived as grandiose and alluring. He's just not willing to do the work for it.
Apparently this man hasn't accomplished anything.
There's a reason Hal can't find passion in anything, though. And since I'm explaining this from a psychological standpoint, I'd like to explicate upon David Hawkins' chart of emotions. Hal exists on a base vibration of shame. He doesn't like who he is, but can't be willing to go through the process of changing it. To ascend from a vibration of shame to one of courage and then joy, one first needs to rise to willingness. Hal exists exists on such a low vibration that he is content to steal people's money in order to survive and then simply play video games. His loathing for life is so profound that even upon becoming a superhuman, he still needs an escape into a fantasy world. I mean, why would you be crammed up in your room playing video games when you could quite literally be flying into the sunset?
Finally, inner peace.
So his core motivation beneath all the layers is nothing. This is why when Roxanne finally clearly turns him down, and why wouldn't she? He almost killed her multiple times in the process of professing his feelings for her. He gives up and starts playing video games. At this point, he's alone in his apartment. He doesn't seem to have any friends, and he's clearly not the sharpest knife in the bunch. Should we feel sorry for Hal? For that, we need to explore whether or not there's any redeemability in his character. Let's evaluate the circumstances. Hal is a dumb-witted guy who doesn't have a lot going for him. He's socially awkward and isolated. These things might invoke a bit of pity, especially when placed in contrast to Metro Man, but then we look at Megamind. Megamind wasn't just alienated by society, he was also quite literally an alien. But what made him redeemable was the fact that he could feel passionately about things. In his era of spite, he dedicated time and deliberation to hatching evil plots, and when he decided he wanted to be countered, he went all in on that mission. Hal never went all in on anything. Throughout the first half of the movie, we watch him do absolutely nothing, feel absolutely nothing, and in general, get zilch done. The way I see it, the only time he ever displayed profound emotion paired with action was towards the end of the film when he manically started destroying everything. The only emotion he's ever shown to feel is wrath. It's the lack of connection that he has to himself, the complete and utter lack of direction that fuels his desire for a radical shift in his reality, which he hopes to achieve by dating Roxanne. And this, in turn, fuels his anger at Megamind. Hal's interest in gaining power was based on a delusion of grandeur, in contrast to Metro Man, who left the post of superhero at Metro City simply because it didn't bring him joy anymore. Titan left the post because he didn't get what he had never tried for in the first place: celebration and applause. Throughout the film, Hal never finds joy in anything. He's so obscenely hollow that even all the power in the world can't move him out of the slump that he has created for himself. Hal is content to just survive, and that's why we can't feel sorry for him. We can't even praise him. Hal has no redeeming qualities.
He's hopeless. Hopeless!
Why can't we feel the slightest bit of remorse for Titan? Is there any situation in which he could have chosen a different path? To be honest, I don't think so, and it's because he's pretty empty on the inside. It's sad, but it doesn't make us root for him, and that's because of the similarities between some of his characteristics and another guy's on the show. The reason Hal makes for such a convincing antagonist is that, in juxtaposition to everyone else in the film, he doesn't have a vision. He's done so little in his life that one would think that he was waiting for someone to come bursting through his door to tell him what his life's purpose is. Oh wait, that's exactly what happened. Nope, still didn't work. Hal doesn't have a reason to do anything, and it stems from a place of not loving himself enough to set a target and then try to achieve it. I would discount the love interest here because, as far as Hal is concerned, she already has a boyfriend. It's this lack of respect and care for himself, you might even say self-loathing, that translates into displaced fury at the rest of the world. At Megamind, at Roxanne, at Metro City. And even when he's not smashing the city to bits, he's still hating on his life and fate by refusing to tap into his power. This makes him the perfect Wrathful villain, though, because you can see that his spite is empty, and that is exactly what sets his demise into play. It was inevitable that pudgy and slow Hal could never measure up to the task of being a superhero, or even a lasting supervillain for that matter, but the way that he lost the job was crazy. A lot of tension built up to that moment, though. Everything depicted in the sequences enunciates some of the essential characteristics that comprise a perfect villain of Wrath. Titan actually lost the gig of supervillain in a manner that was absolutely crazy, and one that we definitely saw coming. Even this was so incredibly lazy, he could have gone out a better way. Let me explain. What does divestiture mean? It's to end something by removing or retracting assets. In other words, Titan gets fired. Literally. Towards the climax of the film, Megamind shoots a ray gun at Titan and diffuses the bullet of superhuman powers that has been charging him up. By taking away all of his powers, Titan is back to regular Hal. There's not that much of a difference, except that when Titan expresses rage, he rips apart skyscrapers, and when Hal tries to express frustration, he ends up hurting himself. By deflating Titan back into Hal, also literally, Hal has no physical strength. The balance of the world is restored. The physical aspects of Titan are also representative, however, of Hal's innate villainy. How? Let me get into that. The reason Titan is such a brilliantly written, wrathful villain is in the physicality of him. Let's start with the suit, shall we? It's white, which is supposed to symbolize the heroism that he's originally assigned, but there's also a flaming T for Titan. Fire, rage, wrath, get it? It's also apparent from the time that Hal is just Hal. He has a flaccid body which signifies his apathy, a smug face which subtly suggests his entitlement, and flaming red hair and eyes. No offense to redheads, but I thought the hint here was brilliantly delivered. The transformation from Hal to Titan showcased some other key attributes. Hal slouches, demonstrating insecurity, and Titan stands tall, pointing towards his inflated ego. The core of both, however, as depicted by the character's behavior, is exactly the same. There is, however, one more thing. We can't recall a single time during the film when Metro Man used his laser vision except to pop corn. I, for one, barely noticed this quality. Hal, on the other hand, is keen to immediately begin melting things. The goofy and aloof demeanor of Hal is actually meant to signify his lack of strategy, and as represented by his muscular body as Titan, this guy uses brute strength to intimidate and attempt to control. Hal Stewart was a perfect example of how a great supervillain isn't created by granting him special powers. In line with the theme of the film, the irony of his villainy is the complete lack of substance in his personality traits. He's not a bland character, though. Combined with his near invulnerability, Hal's wrathful nature makes him a formidable opponent. It's impressive how the writers managed to make a complete imbecile rise up to the challenge of shaking Megamind and making him run to Roxanne to brainstorm ways to defeat him. The guy had a brain thrice as big as regular people, and he still felt as though he needed help to come up with a plan to beat Titan. How can you write an antagonist like this guy? Now that I've broken his personality down, it should be relatively simple. Complacency, spite, and a roll of the dice, these were the ingredients chosen to build Titan, supervillain of Metro City. With his ultra superpowers, this guy has dedicated his life to personifying a force of pure evil. Writing Titan is dual-faceted. He has to be represented first as a human being and then as a superhuman. Despite the transformation, however, the essence of his being remained consistent. So how do you write a villain who's enraged by the absence of anything worthwhile in his life and misdirects his untrammeled frustration towards the rest of the world? The key here is to play around with his inadequacy. Let me dive into the steps that you need to take to do so. One of the most noteworthy traits of people who experience extreme bursts of anger is that they are generally quite listless and lethargic. They don't have a strong sense of purpose derived from intrinsic interests, and they seem to compensate for this chronic dissatisfaction and lack of excitement by expressing rage. That's exactly the case with Titan. As depicted throughout the film, Hal is a nobody who has nothing on his mind. He is never actively involved with the state of affairs in Metro City, doesn't want to fly high, even when he quite literally can, and believes himself to be a victim of circumstance. So powerful is his sense of victimhood, in fact, that even a cape and laser vision can't turn it around. It's this very victimhood that makes him lazy and unmotivated, another central trait of his which makes him all the more impactful in his short-lived destructive stint. This is because the radical shift from all-consuming hopelessness and passivity into a deranged wreck-it-all spree is horrifying, to say the least. As I've mentioned before, Hal is idiotic no matter how big his six-pack or what sized cloak he wears. I mean, what moron would feel dejected at the prospect of being turned down by a girl who's made it abundantly clear throughout the film that she doesn't like him? And who would use that as an excuse to cram themselves into a room the size of a shoebox? Come on, man, get out there. I bet you could soar through the solar system right now. What are you doing? This makes him even more sinister as a destructive force because with a smart villain, you can at least expect reason. With a dumb one, you can expect nothing but entitlement and fury at their own inadequacy. And because a half-wit doesn't know how to use their power, they could be 10 times as destructive with it. In sharp contrast to Megamind, who channels his spite at being isolated into intricate designs to irk Metro Man, Titan only wishes to annihilate. This is, again, because of his lack of direction, which ties in perfectly with his listlessness. It's also that Megamind appears to already know that the only way to get Titan up and running is to infuriate him, which he does when he mocks him. Hal Stewart isn't just dumb, he's also emotionally very immature. Not only does he never come close to brushing the surface of what Roxanne is feeling throughout the years that he's worked with him, he also has the entitlement of a child. Rather than working towards anything in his life, he expects it to be plopped into his lap, and then throws a temper tantrum when that inevitably doesn't happen. The babying of Titan is further showcased by the roles of Megamind and Minion as Titan's space parents. This infantile silliness is further demonstrated when one of the first things that Titan does upon getting superpowers is to give himself a wedgie and exclaim in surprise when it doesn't hurt.
It doesn't even hurt. Don't even feel it.
I mean, bro, what is wrong with you? This infantilism is great to shape his character, however, because through it, we can see that a fit of rage is to be expected. In Megamind, DreamWorks went all in on the concept of personal growth and development. It's something that we witness happening across the characters of both Megamind and Metro Man. Megamind finds fulfillment in being good, and Metro Man finds joy in music, which he's terrible at playing, by the way. You know it, I just said it. Hal Stewart, however, never experiences true growth. Rather, he gets superficial character development through the institution of extraterrestrial powers. This lays the perfect groundwork for his short trip from the vibration of shame to anger, never achieving fulfillment through willingness and courage, and never experiencing life from anything other than a loathsome lens.
Have you before? Atrocity, minion.
The blue guy has spent his whole life in prison and still has a greater appreciation for the good things in life than Hal does. Titan was doomed to fail from the beginning. This is because he was written to be destined for failure. It wasn't because the powers he got could be rescinded at any given time, it was because he had simply never applied himself to achieving anything before in his life. This lack of willpower, combined with his superficiality and mindlessness, got him to set himself up for collapse. Nobody was rooting for him to win, not even, in truth, his own self. If he were, his attitude would be different. Hal Stewart was a ridiculous choice for a hero, but he was the perfect choice for a wrathful villain of agony and rage. Give me a guy who has half the brain cells of an ape and suddenly inflate him with superhuman strength. On top of everything, reject him and then subject him to scorn. What did anyone think was going to happen? The reason Titan was such a great villain is that he was a shell of a being, a shell that exploded into a bomb when provoked. I think that DreamWorks did an excellent job of highlighting the importance of values, motive, and passion by imbuing such an elaborate absence of them inside him. What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like and share this video for more in-depth explorations of villainy in animated films.